Another benefit at that time was I knew people who had strong reputations in our industry who wanted to come work with me. And so I knew that when the time came to develop the business, we would have people to do the work. I felt like at the time, by that many years, that I had the technical education and experience and the on-the-job experience to know how to go about winning the work. And so I felt like I was ready in that way. And then finally, and importantly, I had the support of my spouse, which is more important than sometimes we give it credit for. So now I'm going to go crazy with my desktop publishing again, and I will describe this to you. If you take from 1993 to today, when I started my business, that's supposed to be a table over there. I started at my kitchen table, and the interesting thing was I started with Jill Heath, who is now our CEO, but at the time Jill had her own business as a CPA firm, and I needed somebody to do my CPA stuff, and I felt like really finance was my weakest area personally, and so I needed somebody who was really sharp and who I could trust, which above all was important. And Jill and I met and clicked right off, and so we spent many months, those first 6 months, many hours eating Chinese food lunches because they were the cheapest place to eat lunch, and sitting at that kitchen table making plans. After 6 months, I did get some office space. They called it Class B. I would call it maybe Class C space, but I was still scared to death about not having the money to do what I needed to do. So I was trying to keep my expenses to a minimum. So we opened an office and we hired our first staff and got our first work, and it was with NCDOT. And then in 1997, we opened our first branch office, and that was in Charlotte. That's why the crown's there. And I didn't even know on my clip art that little crown, I kept thinking it was my eyes, but it's sort of glowing there. It's interesting. But anyway, I had two reasons for opening my first office in Charlotte. One was, of course, I felt like it was a great market for us, and we already had work there with the city of Charlotte, but also my parents live nearby, and I've just found over the years that everything, as an entrepreneur, everything you do blends together. And for me, I'm thinking, hey, I can go to Charlotte and work, and I can check up on my parents, and take care of them. So then in 2001, Mulkey graduated from the DBE program, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. So we were no longer, of course we remain today a woman-owned business, but we were no longer what they call disadvantaged. And I'm going to talk more about that in a minute as well. In 2004, we first were listed on the ENR, Engineering News Records, top 500 engineering firms in the country. And that's sort of like our Forbes 500 for engineers and contractors. So that was a huge deal for us. And if I'm not mistaken, Jill, we've been on it every year but one since then. By 2005, we were truly a southeastern U.S. firm with offices from North Carolina to Florida. In 2006, when times started getting tough, I named Jill president. And CEO in 2008. And that's probably the smartest decision I've ever made in my life. So, I mean, personally, but also for the business. And that's another thing I'll comment on, that, I think it's important as entrepreneurs to realize that different companies take different types of leadership at different times in their lives. It's changing all the time. And I just pat myself on the back for realizing that our company really needed a leadership change, and that Jill was she brought the right skills to do that, and it has proven to be the case. Okay, so what did I do right? And I'm focusing more on startup because I understand that this group is probably mainly people considering becoming entrepreneurs or new entrepreneurs, and also maybe women. So I'm going to address the whole women thing too. But what did I do right when I look back? I think the three things that I did most right was the business plan. And I know that you hear that ad nauseum, business plan, do a business plan, do a business plan. That was a great thing I had learned. I learned, in my career, not only the things that people, in my opinion, people were doing wrong, but I learned some great skills. And one was my former boss made me do, at the time since I was vice president of marketing, a marketing plan every year. And I really learned to get good at that, and I learned to have some confidence in preparing one. So that's one thing I did right from year one, prepared a business plan. And I made my business plan as simple as I could. I always looked at it in 3 separate areas. First area, I sat down and I said, what do I know? What are the facts? And so I wrote down the facts and everything that were true and real. And that was easy. That just involved a little research. The second part was where you needed the confidence. It was where you made assumptions. And I can tell you for engineers that's tough because, it's sort of hard to think. We like to deal with reality. X equals 6. And so when you started thinking about what's going to happen next year, what's the funding going to be? Where's the work going to come from? How is the economy going to be? Those are things you have to use sort of your educated crystal ball, and that's harder to do, and people don't have always that confidence. But it's very important because otherwise you underestimate your opportunities. And so I had some experience in that, and so based on that, on those assumptions, an example would be I believe that the DOT is going to put most of their funding for next year in roadway design rather than bridge design. That it would be things like that. You can't know it for sure, but you look back on history and you say, well, let's see, for the past 5 years, it's been this way. Do I think it's going to get more, less, or stay the same? It's that kind of thought process, and you make yourself write it down on paper. And then based on that, you come up with your goals. And of course, anytime you have a goal, you need to have an action plan that's measurable. And again, I know you've heard all that, but it's just a universal truth for us, we entrepreneurs. So that was the best thing I did. And I gained more confidence because at the end of the year, I would be amazed that some of my assumptions were so close to being right. Things that I felt like I was pulling out of the air, they were right. And that means that, that comes from that experience, and it gives you confidence that you really do. Most of us know a lot more about our industry than we think we do. The second thing I did right was I had a backup plan in case of failure. Now, my backup plan was I'd go get another job. That I was trying not to owe a lot of money. Of course, the bank wouldn't loan me much anyway. But I tried not to owe a lot of money because I thought, okay, worst case, I can always go get another job. That was my backup plan. Thirdly, I made an honest assessment of my weaknesses. And then I tried to fill that gap with technical staff. Well, in my case, my weaknesses I felt was I wanted to be out doing the business development, the management, that kind of thing. So that meant I couldn't, as I grew, couldn't also be doing all the technical work. So I needed a strong technical staff, and I needed a strong financial mind, and we've already talked about Jill filling that role. So I did assess that. I saw what I was good at, and then decided where I would need to bring in other help. So even more importantly was, what did I do wrong? And I think that's so much more important for you to assess that. Well, one thing early on, how in the beginning as an entrepreneur you do everything. You talk with the bank and you empty the trash. You unclog the toilet, and you prepare a set of construction plans. Well, that's fine in the beginning, but I think too often we wait way too long to bring on that admin help.